They call it a dream role, the kind actors wait their whole lives for. But for Johnny Depp, this one part didn't bring applause, awards, or peace. It brought chaos. Imagine landing a character so intense that it follows you home, seeps into your real personality, and starts blurring the line between acting and living. This wasn't a box office flop. This wasn't bad writing. This was a role that slowly chipped away at his reputation, his relationships, and his sense of self. Years later, Depp admitted this character pushed him to a place he was never prepared to visit, and almost never came back from. The role was Hunter S. Thompson, a real person, not a fictional mask he could remove at the end of the day. When Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas came into his life, Johnny Depp didn't just prepare the usual way. He didn't simply memorize lines or study a script. He moved in with Thompson. He dressed like him. He spoke like him. He lived inside his routines, his habits, his chaos. In multiple interviews published by Rolling Stone and later echoed in court testimony years after, Depp admitted he believed total immersion was the only honest way to play the character. At first, it felt like dedication. Then it started to feel like possession. Hunter S. Thompson wasn't an easy man to portray. He was brilliant, fearless, and destructive in equal measure. His lifestyle was extreme, and his worldview rejected limits. Depp has said on record that while preparing for the film, he stopped acting and started absorbing. Friends noticed changes. His sleep patterns shifted. His behavior grew more erratic. What made it worse was that the film itself demanded excess. The story lived in a surreal space where reality bent and consequences felt optional. For an actor already known for pushing boundaries, this role removed the last guardrails. The movie was released in 1998, and while it later became a cult classic, its initial reception was divided. Critics were confused. Studios were nervous. But inside Johnny Depp, something far more serious was happening. In a 2011 interview with The Guardian, Depp admitted that after the film wrapped, he struggled to come back. Those were his words. He said he didn't immediately recognize where Hunter ended and where Johnny began. That confusion didn't stay on set. It followed him into his personal life. This was the point where the public image started to change. Before this role, Depp was already known as unconventional, but he was still seen as grounded. After Fear and Loathing, the narrative shifted. Tabloids began framing him as unstable instead of artistic, intense instead of committed, strange instead of deep. Casting conversations changed quietly behind closed doors. Insiders later revealed that some studios began labeling him high risk, not because of box office numbers, but because of unpredictability. Depp himself addressed this years later during testimony in the UK libel trial, where he spoke openly about method acting and its dangers. He stated that he underestimated the psychological cost of staying in character for too long. This wasn't said as an excuse. It was said as reflection. The role didn't destroy him overnight. It worked slowly, blurring identity, amplifying traits that were already there, and normalizing extremes. Hunter S. Thompson remained in his life long after the cameras stopped rolling. Their friendship continued, and Depp even financed some of Thompson's projects. Loyalty became part of the trap. Depp felt responsible for honoring the man he portrayed. But honoring Hunter also meant tolerating chaos. When Thompson later took his own life in 2005, Depp paid for an elaborate memorial, launching the writer's ashes from a cannon. The gesture made headlines, but behind the spectacle was unresolved grief. Depp later told Vanity Fair that Thompson's death forced him to confront how deeply that role had embedded itself into his emotional world. By the early 2000s, the consequences were visible. His relationships became volatile. His lifestyle intensified. Alcohol became more present, something Depp later acknowledged under oath, saying substance use became a coping mechanism rather than recreation. Again, this wasn't framed as blame on the role alone. But he made it clear that Fear and Loathing was the moment where the door opened, and nothing fully closed it again. What makes this role different from others is that it wasn't fictional chaos. It was real-world darkness. Playing a pirate or a gothic outsider still allowed distance. Hunter S. Thompson required empathy with a man who lived without limits. Psychologists who later commented on method acting in documentaries like The Dark Side of Method Acting often referenced Depp's experience as a cautionary example, noting how prolonged identity blending can destabilize even seasoned performers. Depp continued to work, of course. Massive franchises followed. Global fame exploded. But the foundation was cracked. In interviews with Rolling Stone in 2018, he admitted that fame amplified unresolved issues instead of fixing them. The public saw excess. The industry saw liability. And Depp, by his own words, felt like he was running on fumes, trying to outpace a version of himself that began during that one role. What's important is that this isn't speculation. These are Depp's own admissions, spread across decades, interviews, and legal testimony. He never said Fear and Loathing ruined his career. What he said was more chilling. He said it changed him in ways he didn't understand at the time. It normalized living at the edge. It taught him that disappearing into someone else could feel safer than sitting with himself. And here's the part most people miss. The audience celebrated the performance. Critics later praised it. Fans called it fearless. But no one asked what it cost. The film gained cult status, but the man behind it carried the weight quietly. When Depp later faced public legal battles, many behaviors were viewed without context. Few traced the line back to the moment where dedication crossed into damage. By the time he reflected on it openly, years had passed. Careers had shifted. Reputations had hardened. In one rare, calm interview with Depp said something simple. He said, "Some characters don't leave when the director says cut." That line summarizes everything. Fear and Loathing wasn't just a movie. It was a doorway. And once he stepped through it, coming back was never guaranteed. This is why Johnny Depp has referred to that role as one that almost destroyed his life. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded too deeply. Not because it was rejected, but because it was embraced without limits. And the most dangerous roles aren't the ones that end careers instantly. They're the ones that quietly reshape a person while the world applauds. After Fear and Loathing, something subtle but dangerous settled into Johnny Depp's process. Immersion stopped being a tool and became a habit. In later films, he didn't just prepare, he disappeared. Whether it was the quiet menace of Whitey Bulger or the eccentric detachment of Willy Wonka, Depp wasn't switching characters on and off anymore. He was letting them live inside him. In a Rolling Stone profile from 2018, he admitted that he often avoided going home after shoots because silence made the characters louder. That admission matters, because it shows the role didn't end in 1998. It rewired how he worked and how he escaped himself. Hollywood rewarded the intensity at first. Directors praised his fearlessness. Audiences loved the unpredictability. But privately, cracks widened. People close to him described a man who struggled with boundaries, not just professionally but emotionally. Depp himself later testified that he found it easier to communicate through characters than as himself. That isn't romantic. It's a warning sign. Psychologists who reviewed his public statements during the defamation trials pointed out classic dissociation markers, often linked to prolonged identity immersion. Again, this wasn't diagnosis, but expert commentary grounded in behavioral patterns Depp openly acknowledged. The financial success that followed only complicated things. When the Pirates franchise exploded, Depp suddenly had unlimited resources to avoid discomfort. Isolation became easier. Excess became normalized. He said under oath that money allowed problems to hide longer. Instead of forcing change, fame delayed consequences. And when consequences finally arrived, they arrived publicly and brutally. But long before courtrooms and headlines, there were quiet moments where Depp admitted he knew something was wrong. In a lesser-known Q&A session archived by the British Film Institute, Depp was asked about method acting. His answer was unusually direct. He said he no longer believed full immersion was heroic. He called it dangerous if not handled carefully. That shift in tone mattered because it contradicted the myth he once embodied. This wasn't a young rebel defending chaos. This was a man looking back, recognizing a line he crossed without realizing it. Relationships suffered most. People often reduce this period of his life to tabloid drama, but the deeper issue was instability. Depp admitted that intense roles left him emotionally raw, reactive, and exhausted. Instead of recovering between projects, he stacked performances back to back. Fear and Loathing had taught him to live without a reset button. And over time, that cost him trust, clarity, and control. What makes this story uncomfortable is that no one stopped him. Studios kept hiring him. Fans kept applauding. The industry rarely intervenes when behavior is framed as artistic temperament. In fact, it often encourages it. Depp later said that had someone told him to slow down after Fear and Loathing, he might have listened. But no one did. Because the performance worked. And success can be more dangerous than failure. During the height of his legal battles, Many resurfaced interviews took on new meaning. Lines once seen as quirky now sounded like cries for grounding. When Depp said he felt safer inside characters, it wasn't arrogance. It was avoidance. And the pattern traced back directly to Hunter S. Thompson. Playing a man who rejected reality taught him how to do the same, without realizing the long-term cost. Even his creative choices reflected this shift. He gravitated toward outsiders, eccentrics, and fractured identities. Rarely did he play someone stable or ordinary. That wasn't coincidence. In a Vanity Fair interview, Depp admitted he didn't trust normalcy anymore. That distrust wasn't innate, it was learned. And it began when he learned how powerful losing himself could feel. There's also guilt in this story. Depp has spoken about feeling responsible for glamorizing Thompson's excess. Despite loving the man, he questioned whether honoring him on screen also meant enabling a destructive myth. That internal conflict lingered. When Thompson died, Depp didn't just lose a friend. He lost the person who embodied the character that changed him. Grief collided with identity, and without separation, healing stalled. By the time Depp openly reflected on fear and loathing as almost destroying his life, it wasn't a dramatic claim. It was a measured one. He didn't blame the film. He blamed his inability to step back. That distinction is crucial. The role didn't hurt him because it was dark. It hurt him because he stayed there too long. Today, when acting schools discuss the risks of extreme method acting, Depp's experience is often referenced alongside others who struggled. Not as scandal, but as caution. He survived, but not untouched. Careers can recover. Reputations can be rebuilt. Identity is harder. And that's the real damage he was talking about. This story isn't about regret. Depp has never disowned the film. It's about awareness. About understanding that commitment without boundaries can become self-erasure. And when an actor says one role almost destroyed his life, he isn't talking about awards or money. He's talking about losing the ability to recognize himself without a script. Fear and Loathing gave the world an unforgettable performance. But it also showed how thin the line is between dedication and destruction. And Johnny Depp learned that lesson the hard way, long after the applause faded, when the only audience left was himself. If this story made you see Johnny Depp differently, then pause for a second. Stories like this don't trend because they're comfortable. They matter because they're honest. Most people only see performances, not the cost behind them. If you value real storytelling, real consequences, and real human complexity, stay connected. Support content that goes deeper than headlines. Share this with someone who thinks fame protects people. And if you want more stories where success has a shadow, hit subscribe and stay with us, because the most important truths are usually the ones hiding behind applause.